Most people remember The Tonight Show as lighthearted, charming, and safe. But behind Johnny Carson's smooth smile was a list, one that almost no one was supposed to see. It wasn't a guest list. It was a blacklist. Rumors have swirled for decades that Carson quietly banned a handful of Hollywood icons from ever returning to the stage. Not because they were boring, but because what they did off camera shocked even him. These were stars the public adored, legends whose names still glitter in old Hollywood lights. But Carson had seen what fans hadn't. The cruelty, the ego, the outbursts that made producers whisper, "Never again." Tonight, we're pulling back that curtain, revealing the stories, the rumors, and the shocking moments that turned America's favorite host against 9 of the biggest names in entertainment history. And by the end, you'll see just how thin the line was between Hollywood royalty and Carson's private list of the unforgivable.
You've been snooping around ever since I got this job, trying to find out what it is. And now you know.
To the public, Joan Crawford was a picture of poise, all elegance, red lips, and flawless control. But behind the velvet gowns and champagne smiles, rumors say she could be terrifying. When Crawford appeared on The Tonight Show, Carson expected Hollywood royalty. What he got instead was a masterclass in intimidation. Crew members whispered that Joan demanded the studio lighting be adjusted 6 times before cameras even rolled, insisting every shadow be erased. One assistant who adjusted a lamp without her approval reportedly got a full-force glare that could freeze glass. And when Carson tried to joke about her good side, Crawford didn't laugh. She stopped the show cold and demanded the line be cut from the edit. According to production insiders, Carson stayed polite on camera but was livid afterward, calling her one of the most difficult guests he'd ever dealt with. To her fans, she was perfection, but to those who worked behind the scenes, she was a storm in silk gloves. Crawford's control went beyond vanity. It was power. And once Carson saw that power turned cruel, her name quietly disappeared from future guest lists. But that was just the beginning. Because while Joan ruled through intimidation, the next man on Carson's blacklist ruled through fear.
I play Daphnis and Chloe, or the Sunken Cathedral, the Engulfed Cathedral.
Frank Sinatra didn't just walk onto a talk show. He arrived. Wherever he went, the atmosphere shifted. Crew members stood a little straighter. Producers checked every detail twice. And Johnny Carson? Even he treaded carefully. Sinatra's charm was legendary, but so was his temper. When the cameras were rolling, he was smooth as velvet. But once the red light turned off, stories began to spread. Stories that made even Carson's staff nervous. One night, Sinatra showed up late, surrounded by bodyguards who cleared the hallways before he'd even step inside. According to studio staff, he didn't greet anyone, just tossed his coat to the production assistant and asked, "You know how much airtime I'm getting?" During the interview, Carson tried to tease him about his reputation, joking that Frank runs this town. Sinatra smiled, but later, he reportedly grabbed a floor manager by the tie for calling him Frankie. Carson never forgot it. Behind the music and the legend was a man who demanded loyalty, respect, and control. And anyone who didn't give it risked being shut out. After that episode, Sinatra was rarely invited back. Carson didn't say much publicly, but privately, he'd call Sinatra the guest you don't tell no. But if Sinatra's power came from intimidation, the next name on Carson's list was driven by something else entirely. Ego so large, it tried to run the show itself.
And Hollywood is simply the most pleasant place to live in left.
When Orson Welles entered a room, it stopped feeling like Carson's show and started feeling like his. He didn't need to raise his voice. His presence alone filled the studio. The man who had rewritten film history with Citizen Kane now seemed determined to rewrite the rules of late-night television, too. From the moment he sat down, Welles took over. He dismissed Carson's first question with a booming laugh, leaned back, and declared, "Johnny, you don't interview me. We have a conversation." Then he ignored every cue card the producers had prepared, spinning stories that ran far beyond the time slot. Carson tried to keep pace, but Welles was a hurricane of words, charming, witty, impossible to interrupt. At one point, he even directed the cameras himself, telling the crew where to zoom. The control room froze. Nobody dared cut him off. Viewers loved it, They thought it was all part of the act. But behind the scenes, Carson was furious. When the show ended, he reportedly turned to his staff and said, "Never again. I host this show, not him." Wells wasn't cruel like Crawford or intimidating like Sinatra. He was something else. Unstoppable. His ego was entertainment in its purest form, but it left no oxygen for anyone else on set. And if Wells dominated through intellect and presence, the next guest on Carson's list did it with something sharper. A tongue so lethal, no one dared talk back.
Well, she's just totally impossible.
Really?
Yes, I don't think we have the time to go into all the reasons.
Betty Davis didn't walk onto The Tonight Show. She commanded it. Every eye followed her. Every word cut like a blade. She was brilliance wrapped in danger, and Carson knew it the moment she sat down. Her voice carried the weight of old Hollywood. Smoky, confident, unfiltered. But it wasn't just charm. When Davis spoke, people braced themselves. Within minutes, she had interrupted Carson twice, corrected one of his jokes, and called a fellow guest sweet but hopelessly dull. The audience laughed. The other guest didn't. Between segments, she demanded whiskey, real whiskey, as she reportedly put it, and snapped at a makeup artist for touching a legend. Carson, ever professional, tried to steer the show back on track. But Davis wasn't interested in being steered. She wanted the spotlight, and she got it. The next day, according to longtime staffers, Carson said she was one of the most electric and exhausting guests we ever had. Electric was putting it mildly. Davis had turned live television into verbal warfare, and Carson knew better than to risk another round. Her intelligence made her unstoppable. Her confidence made her dangerous, and her wit left even Johnny searching for his next line. But while Davis could destroy with words, the next name on Carson's list caused chaos in a much darker, unpredictable way. One that made even the crew uneasy be near him.
They said, well, he's fine, but Mickey McGuire has black hair. So she says, well, I'll fix that.
Mickey Rooney was once Hollywood's golden boy, the unstoppable child star who grew into a legend. But by the time he sat across from Johnny Carson, that golden glow had started to fade, and what replaced it was chaos. At first, Carson was excited. Rooney was unpredictable, funny, full of stories, perfect for live television. But as soon as the cameras rolled, it became clear this wasn't going to be the light-hearted nostalgia act the producers expected. According to crew members, Rooney arrived in high spirits. Too high. He slurred his jokes, interrupted Carson constantly, and veered into personal rants that left the host staring blankly at the cue cards. When Carson tried to steer the conversation back, Rooney fired off jokes that crossed every boundary. Then came the moment that sealed it. Off camera, Rooney allegedly made inappropriate comments to a production assistant, loud enough for the crew to hear. Carson kept a composure, but those who were there said he was furious once the segment ended. That night, the energy in the studio turned from laughter to discomfort. The audience didn't see what happened behind the curtain, but Carson did, and that was enough. Rooney was never invited back. The official reason? Scheduling conflicts. The real reason? Carson didn't want another disaster on live TV. And while Rooney's chaos came from self-destruction, the next name on the list was a different breed of difficult. A diva so demanding, she could shut down an entire studio with a single look.
Well, I was in Africa.
Yeah, parts of that are below the equator.
India.
Well, so now you knew.
In Australia.
Zsa Zsa Gabor didn't just visit The Tonight Show. She arrived like royalty. Diamonds flashing, entourage trailing, perfume so thick it seemed to have its own spotlight. Everyone expected glamour, but what they got was pure chaos. Before the show even started, her list of demands was already legendary. She wanted the studio temperature kept precisely at 72 degrees, her dressing room filled with pink roses, and her makeup done only with a specific European brand she'd flown in herself. The crew scrambled, terrified to get anything wrong. When Carson greeted her backstage, she barely looked up. "Darling," she said, "please make sure the lighting flatters me. I am not 20 anymore." The audience adored her charm once the cameras rolled. She laughed, flirted, and called Johnny a naughty little man. But behind that laughter, the set was unraveling. During commercial breaks, She snapped at the makeup team, complained about the chair, and demanded retakes that simply didn't exist in live television. By the end of the night, Carson was smiling on camera, but reportedly told producers afterward, "Never again. I host conversations, not coronations." To the world, Zsa Zsa was the queen of glamour. But to Carson, she was a guest who proved that some divas didn't just steal the spotlight, they burned it down. And yet, as impossible as she wasn't the most volatile name on his list. That title belonged to an actress whose every appearance felt like a ticking time bomb, one that could go off without warning.
Women can hold their breath much longer than men. I'm not quite sure why, but they can.
If there was one guest Carson could never predict, it was Shelley Winters. Every time her name appeared on the lineup, the crew braced for impact. Winters was magnetic, raw, emotional, and completely unfiltered. She could go from laughter to tears in a single breath. And she didn't care the cameras were rolling. That unpredictability made her fascinating and exhausting. During one infamous appearance, she launched into a passionate monologue about her past marriages. 5 minutes straight, no breaks, no questions. Carson tried to jump in, but she waved him off and kept talking. The audience was half laughing, half holding its breath. Between segments, she reportedly scolded a camera operator for making her look wide, and moments later threw a cup of water at herself, claiming she needed to cool down. Nobody knew if it was part of an act or just Shelley being Shelley. After one especially chaotic interview, Carson told producers, "She's great television, but she's a tornado, and you don't invite a tornado twice." Shelley Winters wasn't cruel or vain. She was volatile, and that volatility made her unforgettable, but also unmanageable. Still, her chaos had an honesty to it. The next name on Carson's list, though, that one was different. Because while Winters lost control, this next star used theirs to divide and alienate nearly everyone around them.
I've never trained in a gym.
Jane Russell was Hollywood royalty, confident, glamorous, and utterly unapologetic. On screen, she was the perfect mix of charm and power. But behind the scenes, her old-school views often clashed with the changing times, and with the Tonight Show's more modern, inclusive culture. When Russell appeared on Carson's show, producers expected classic Hollywood elegance. What they got instead was controversy. Mid-interview, she shifted the conversation toward her political beliefs, blunt, polarizing, and decades out of step with the younger crowd tuning in. Carson, known for his quick wit and subtle control, tried to redirect. She didn't budge. According to those who worked the show, tension filled the room. Russell made a few pointed comments about the way Hollywood had changed, and it didn't sit well with anyone, especially the younger staff. Rumors say that after the show, a heated exchange broke out backstage between Russell and a member of the makeup team she had dismissed earlier. Carson handled it with grace. On camera, he smiled and signed off as usual. But privately, he was done. Her name vanished from the guest roster, and she became one of the few golden era icons Carson chose never to book again. She wasn't chaotic like Shelley Winters or cruel like Joan Crawford. She was something trickier, out of time, a star from an era that didn't fit the stage Carson had built. But if Russell represented Hollywood's outdated side, the final guest on Carson's blacklist embodied something far darker, a side of show business that blurred the line between genius and cruelty.
We're used to the craziness.
Yeah.
And when you talk regular, it's like another person.
Jerry Lewis was supposed to be the dream guest. Funny, fast, unpredictable, and adored by millions. On screen, he was America's comic sweetheart. Off screen, he was the man who raised millions for charity. But when the camera stopped rolling, Johnny Carson saw a very different Jerry Lewis, one the public never got to meet. From the moment Lewis walked into the studio, the tension was palpable. He corrected staff members, rearranged his set chair twice, and reportedly told a young stagehand, "Kid, you'll never work in this town if you breathe that loud again." The crew laughed nervously, thinking he was joking. He wasn't. When the show began, he took over the segment, cutting Carson off mid-question, delivering long monologues about himself, and even adjusting Johnny's tie in the middle of the interview. Carson smiled, but his eyes said everything. The control, the arrogance, the subtle cruelty. It all clashed with the respectful, balanced energy Carson demanded on his show. The breaking point came during a commercial break, when Lewis allegedly snapped at cameraman for missing a cue, shouting that he'd ruined the shot. Carson didn't say a word then, but after the show, he did. According to those close to him, Carson said simply, "That man doesn't come back." Jerry Lewis' genius was undeniable, but so was his ego. He was a rare kind of guest who made even Johnny Carson, the king of late-night control, feel powerless on his own stage. And with that, Carson's private blacklist was complete. A quiet reminder that fame and decency don't always share the same room. But what that list really revealed might be even darker than the names on it. Johnny Carson never talked publicly about having a blacklist. Not in interviews, not in memoirs, not even in private conversations that ever made it a print. But the whispers never stopped. Producers, writers, and former crew members all said the same thing. Some stars were simply never invited back. And maybe that's what made Carson different. He wasn't chasing drama or headlines or feuds. He was protecting something, the tone, the class, the magic of late-night television. For him, it wasn't about who was famous. It was about who respected the stage. Every name on that rumored list, from Joan Crawford's icy perfection to Jerry Lewis' explosive control, reflected something Carson despised: arrogance, cruelty, or chaos disguised as charm. To him, that kind of darkness didn't belong in America's living rooms. Yet, it's almost poetic. The same guests who made Carson furious also made him unforgettable. Those tense, unpredictable moments are part of what made The Tonight Show legendary, because live television isn't about perfection. It's about pressure, personality, and the unpredictable spark that can turn a conversation into history. Carson's blacklist wasn't just a warning. It was a mirror showing how even the brightest stars can cast the darkest shadows. So the next time you watch an old clip and see Johnny flash that tight, polite smile, look a little closer. Behind it might be the man who'd already decided, this guest will never sit here again. Because in Hollywood, silence can speak louder than any scandal.